Welcome everyone to this special Affirmation live event. Specifically, this evening's discussion will be on intersex awareness, and we have with us a special guest, Courtney Skaggs. This discussion is intended to bring greater understanding of what it means to be intersex. We'll discuss the challenges of being at the intersection of being intersex, being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and how the LGBTQIA community can ensure that it's more inclusive of intersex individuals and its advocacy for all sexual and gender minorities. So our special guest tonight is Courtney Skaggs. Courtney, thank you so much for being with us this evening. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing really well.
Wonderful.
It's been a great week.
So Courtney, you are a lesbian, you're a former Latter-day Saint, and you're intersex. Is this correct?
Yeah, all three.
Wow. Can you share with us a bit about like where and how you grew up, your family, your experience as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and how you first came to know you were intersex?
Yeah, that's really a lifelong story there, but I grew up in San Diego, California. I'm here right now in San Diego. But I grew up, both parents active in the church. I have an older brother. And we really grew up pretty active, going regularly, holding callings. And I really enjoyed my time in the church as a young person. Like, our youth groups were incredible. The girls would go on like high adventure trips. I remember hiking in the Grand Canyon to have a soup eye as a teenager. And I hiked Half Dome with our young women's group. It's a pretty great hike here in California in Yosemite National Park. And so I had a lot of really great experiences growing up in the church. Generally, I was pretty bought in, and our family was pretty active. I've known I've been intersex since I was a small kid. Intersex traits manifest themselves at different times in people's lives, and mine was apparent at birth. And so my parents knew from the time I was a baby, and so they were pretty forthright with me. So I knew I was intersex right around the age of like the birds and bees conversation, the first time you kind of talk about those things. So at a young age, I knew, and I was kind of told the basics, rudimentary, you won't be able to have kids, your body's just a little bit different. And at the time I was like, cool, I don't care, I'll adopt kids, whatever. And really kind of progressed through my youth ages. Getting to middle school was it got a bit tougher because everyone's going through puberty, and I'm intersex. I didn't go through puberty like everyone else did. And that's when things kind of got a little bit harder for me. I had to start lying about getting my period and wondering if my body was normal compared to my peers. But, stayed active in the church through high school, went to BYU Hawaii. I was actually a walk-on student athlete there, competed on the volleyball team. We went to the national tournament. Incredible experiences at BYU Hawaii. I love that place. And then I served in a mission after college. So it's a little bit of my background. I knew I was intersex that whole time. And a lot of what I did was, we'll get into it, I'm sure, but I hid a lot of that. It wasn't something that was widely talked about at the time. And with hiding and having a huge secret like that, there's a lot of shame and secrecy there that's pretty damaging. But yeah, that's kind of my background. And I didn't come into my lesbian identity and really kind of open my mind to other possibilities until I left the church not too long after my mission. So it's kind of the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, I think that when you had reached out to us about, having this conversation or doing something for Intersex Awareness Day, which is tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. One of the things I did was I went to the Affirmation website and I just searched intersex. Mm-hmm. And not one real piece of content for intersex individuals or educating people about intersex individuals came up. But we try so hard to be inclusive of the entire LGBTQIA community, and a lot of people don't know that I in LGBTQIA stands for intersex. And I think because there's not a lot of very vocal people, especially in general, probably, but especially sort of in our small Latter-day Saint or former Latter-day Saint community that are out there talking about what it means to be an intersex individual. So can you kind of give us an overview of what it means for someone to be intersex and how common that is?
Yeah. That's a great question, because a lot of people don't know what that I means in the acronym, or they forget what it means, or they forget that we exist. I've heard all of those things. So intersex people are born with sex traits that don't fit the standard male and female that we think of. So this can be through anatomy, oftentimes through genitalia, but also chromosomes, hormone production and response, and then secondary sex characteristics like breast development and hair growth. So those are the main markers of generally what makes up our sex. And this is biological sex. This isn't, sometimes people get confused and they say, is intersex transgender? We're speaking in biological terms. This is natural biological variation. And it really kind of blows up the binary systems that we think of, male and female, X, Y, XX. It's just, we all have different variations as intersex people. There's dozens of different variations. In terms of my intersex variation, it's androgen insensitivity, which basically means that my body doesn't like androgens or male hormones. So when I was being formed in my mom's womb, belly, whatever you want to say, the DNA actually went out XY, so male, but my body rejected the corresponding testosterone or androgens. And so my body rejected or is androgen insensitive. So there's dozens of other variations for intersex people. And it's just proof that our bodies and our sex is not binary. It's really fluid, just like our genders are. Our sex is natural, and there's variance there.
So how common is it to be an intersex individual? Like what portion of the population are we looking at here?
Yeah, estimates are at 1.7% of the population have intersex traits.
Wow.
So that's just as common as redheads. If you do the math, that's over 250,000 church members and over 5 million people in the United States.
Wow. Okay. So definitely a lot more common than I would have, like, even thrown out a guess for, because I know a lot of people with red hair. So like, I'm trying to think of that many people and thinking about that many people kind of walking around and me possibly engaging with who may have those intersex characteristics. Do all people that have some level of intersex characteristics or traits know that they have those traits, or do many just never realize that's what's happening with them?
Yeah, not always. It depends on the variation or the trait. Some are manifest, quite early. Some people don't go through puberty, and then they start getting some tests and they realize, all right, my body's not producing hormones the way that is typical, or my karyotype or my genetics, I'm not XY like I thought I was. I'm XXY, and so a lot of people go through their life not knowing. It's not uncommon for intersex people to find out they're intersex into their 20s and 30s. Even later, it's not uncommon, especially with the older generations where medicine wasn't as advanced. We're getting to stages or places now where people are finding out that their children are intersex before they're even born. So definitely moving in a good direction there.
Okay. So, I've in my reading about intersex, there seems to be some really challenging medical aspects, especially after a child is born, and decisions by parents and doctors on how to, you know, effectively assign that child a gender at that time. Have we gotten better about that as a society? Like you talked about being able to identify so early and getting better in those forms. Are we getting better about how we actually let intersex individuals sort of grow and develop and then sort of self-determine?
I think we're getting there. There's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of the trauma that the intersex community experiences is because of the medical industry. A little bit of background on my experience and so many others. I was operated on at 6 weeks old to normalize my genitalia. And that what that does to someone is it creates this long lasting being unsure, feeling like you needed to be fixed, wondering if you're normal. And also just this, I would say like a strong fear of vulnerability, intimacy, all that aspect. And so I think we are getting there with the medical community, but it's really slow and it's really difficult. There's only been one US hospital that has vowed to stop intersex surgeries, or at least reevaluate them. And that's Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. That wasn't until after immense pressure by the Intersex Justice Project by Sean Saifa Wall and Pitchin Pagonis. There's a lot of like PR pressure for them to come out and like end those surgeries or reevaluate their processes there. The reason why it's so hard to get that change, I think, in the medical community is because it costs a lot of money for intersex care. It takes a lot of takes a multidisciplinary team to serve intersex people because they're, it's psycho, it's social, it's medical. So we're getting there with the medical community, but it's pretty slow. I'd say social progress is definitely moving forward. Parents are asking, support groups, connecting with intersex people, how should I raise my child? And then they can make informed decisions, especially early on if the medical practitioners that they're working with are suggesting things, they can come to the intersex community and get some background. So we're moving in the right direction. It is a bit slow, and there's no protections for intersex people against, intersex genital mutilation in the United States. There's no laws, there's no protections for our bodies. But I think it is moving there. It is quite slow. So,
are there those kind of laws in other nations?
I would have to double check on that. I think there are a few European nations that have some preliminary laws, but it's pretty early on. Intersex advocacy really didn't take off until the 90s. And so our movement and our voices are quite young in relation to other LGBT movements or just civil rights or social justice movements.
As like the LGBTQIA community is sort of those medical guidelines and laws something that we should be aware of and advocate for intersex siblings?
Yeah, I would say so. There was a California state bill a few years ago, I think it was a few years ago now, that ultimately didn't go into effect. And I would anticipate legislation coming forward in the coming years. Kind of where we are as a community, if we step back, is there's just not enough information about us. This may be getting into some of your future questions, but there's not enough research, there's not enough education, there's not enough information because so many of us have been in hiding for decades, our whole lives. And the first US study just came out last week.
Oh, wow.
The result of that study was that intersex people physically and mentally are not healthy compared to averages of the population. And the result of the study was that more information and more studies need to be done. So,
I mean, that's definitely a first step, though, because similar studies have been done for gay and lesbians, transgender individuals, looking at quality of life and things like that.
Exactly.
That gives you sort of a baseline of saying there are issues here that need to be addressed. So I'm glad that that conversation is happening.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned that intersex isn't like being transgender, but I imagine that depending on your characteristics, that there may be some choices an individual makes based on how they're choosing to identify. I mean, the variance is wide, as you've talked about. So I'm sure that there's probably more choice for some individuals than necessarily others, depending on how they feel and how they identify. And that probably relates to pronouns. So within the intersex community, like, do people choose pronouns, use their pronouns? How important is that for people to be aware of as they are speaking to intersex people?
Yeah. Pronouns should always be respected, no matter, where they are in the LGBT community, in my opinion. But it's definitely, I use she, her pronouns and expect them to be respected. There are a lot of intersex people that use they, them pronouns. And if we think about it, you've got your sex and you've got your gender. We've got biological sex that is intersex. And sometimes that, people's gender or the way that they express or the way that they feel is in line with being intersex. And so it's not uncommon for intersex people to be non-binary or to be, gender fluid or queer. And so it's prevalent in the community to use those pronouns and respect them.
Thank you. So you were raised in the church, and as you described, you were sort of, you were all in. You went to a church school, you served a mission. I assume that you had like your own personal testimony and belief in the church. You have known you are intersex since you were young. And you talked about that it didn't really become maybe an issue until like middle school and so on, sort of probably onset of puberty, as we were talking about before, when people first start realizing something's not the same as everyone else. Which is not dissimilar to everyone else in the LGBTQIA community, right? So like it's about that time where hormones are going and attractions are being created, right? And so I imagine that maybe at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been similar for you to start looking at what the church was teaching as far as gender and trying to figure out where you fit in. So what was your experience like in sort of that journey?
So a common experience for intersex people is the pathologizing language and the really strong medical thread. And so growing up, I just thought that I had something wrong with me. It's known as androgen insensitivity syndrome. I drop the syndrome now because I know that nothing's wrong with me. It's just the way that my body is. It's a natural variation of human biology. But because that was taught to me by the medical industry, it was really easy to just relate church topics to that and say, like, this is my trial. Trials are a big theme. How do you get over trials? How do you understand them? How do you have them make you better? So my identity as an intersex person really didn't come until later in life. Having androgen insensitivity was something that I hid and something that I kind of tried to navigate internally. And I didn't really question the church's stance until a couple of years ago. I found the language or the word intersex not until a couple of years ago. And it really resonated. I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like that's me through and through. And so
just to back up, your parents and doctors and whoever you were talking to about sort of you never the word intersex to describe you all that time.
No, I found it on the internet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it is a relatively newer term. One of our intersex elders called for it to be included in the acronym LGBT in 2008.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Yeah, I got that language not until recently. And because of that, the term intersex, literally, inter or in between sexes, really kind of opened my idea to where I fit. That's when I started questioning things. And that's when I started thinking like, okay, where I was raised in this binary system, male and female, our genders are essential, they're eternal. And I was like, I don't really fit into there. Or where do I fit? And so it wasn't until later that I was kind of questioning things or trying to figure it out.
Wow. So, okay, I'm just trying to get the timeline. You're how old now?
I am 29.
You're 29. So basically just in the last like 2-3 years?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so, obviously you did college, you went to the mission. I'm assuming a bit afterwards, you were just sort of living life as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, believing that you're being intersex, or I don't want to use the word syndrome, but I can't in my head put together the pieces of.
You can call it AIS.
AIS, thank you. So that's all you knew, and then you discover the word intersex, and then you start questioning things. Mm-hmm. So many in the LGBTQIA community who are either still current or even former Latter-day Saints cite coming to terms with their identity. And it's interesting you sort of like you referenced that your intersex identity came in later, like you started accepting that identity later. Mm-hmm. That when we start recognizing our identities, they cite that as sort of being the start of like a faith crisis or questioning the church at some level. Mm-hmm. And so would you say sort of those questions as a former member of the church kind of started the process of you leaving the church, going from someone that was like all in to then really confronting these challenging questions? Like, is that what you would say sort of the genesis of you exiting?
I've had that question a lot, and the simple answer is no.
Okay.
I served timeline a little bit again. College, mission. After my mission, I went to Utah and I lived there for about a year, but it was in Utah that my mental health really declined. I was experiencing anxiety and depression for the first time. And a lot of it was linked to the expectations that I had for myself. I was really, really hard on myself. And I was realizing that these commandments or these obligations were just like piling up on me, making it really hard to like love myself and give myself grace and space. And I didn't feel like I was growing. So that's actually what kind of prompted me to step away and focus on my mental health and who I was, and really get grounded in like, okay, who is Courtney? Because for so long I hid like everything of who I was, or a lot of who I was. And it was in that process of discovering myself and understanding who I was that I started to reconcile my intersex identity, starting to love it. It was painful, it's really difficult and scary. And then with that new perspective and that understanding and really being open and kind of a sponge to the world and different things, my sexuality came into play, as well as I learned and explored what it was to be attracted to women and date women.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for clarifying sort of that timeline and process. Everyone is individual and sort of how they approach that. And I think the sort of universal thing is that everyone sort of has to take that step back, right? It's easy to be so like engrossed in like church life, which is fairly all encompassing. And never really take that step back and say, who am I? What am I doing? What makes me happy? Like really addressing like all of those aspects of yourself. So I'm glad you were able to do that. At some point, you started going to church leaders with questions about what the church was teaching about being intersex, or actually not even that, about the absence of what the church was saying about intersex individuals. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I actually started with one of those searches on the website. I searched the church website for intersex and nothing. And I, scoured resources and nothing's really there, or nothing was there at the time. So I called my local bishop, and I knew that, all right, I know the organization, I know how leadership works, and I knew that I needed to kind of go through the chain of command, respect that. So I started with my bishop, and it was a singles ward bishop that I never met before, because came back to San Diego and didn't really go to church. But I called him and I said, hey, I'm intersex and this is what it is. Do you know what the church's stance is? And he's like, you can imagine, like a bishop, and he passed me to the stake president. I went to the stake president, and it was after a few weeks, I was able to meet with him, but I had time to write a letter. Mm-hmm. And it's just a 1-pager. This is who I am. This is what intersex people are. And this is where we don't really fit into the doctrine. And I cited the family proclamation to the world, specifically about gender being essential and eternal. And so he didn't have the answer, but he said he would, run it up the chain of command. This was in late 2018. Went to a regional 70, the one over San Diego. Then and I met with them. And eventually my letter got up to Kevin Pearson, who's over Western North America, I believe, who he then took my letter to Quentin L. Cook, and Dallin H. Oaks read it. So it was an arduous process, a lot of follow-up, a lot of patience. I was terrified reading my letter for the very first time, but it was an incredible experience, and it has been a really good experience in a building one, but hasn't been the smoothest. But it's on their radar. Definitely intersex people are on their radar a lot more now.
So watching the video that you produced, and we'll definitely share a link to that along with this interview, you seem to connect your letter and sort of it going up to the chain of command to Dallin H. Oaks, to the church then actually speaking to the issue not too far later. I mean, we're talking, you started in 2008, we're only in 2020. There's been a lot of changes and updates as far as how the church approaches the entire LGBTQIA community, actually, at this point, including transgender individuals, gay, lesbians. What did the church say about intersex individuals sort of following these communications that you were having?
Yeah, the church came out with a section in the General Handbook of Instruction, and it's titled Individuals Whose Sex is Not Clear at Birth.
Okay.
It names intersex for the first time, to my knowledge. But a little bit of background there, how we got there is my letter was going up the chain of command through a lot of 2019. Mm-hmm. And actually in October of 2019, Dallin H. Oaks addressed church leaders at the General Conference. And he talked to them about, gay and trans communities, and then a little section about the intersex community, or at least people. That address was then read to me by my stake president. They passed it to my stake president, allowed him to read it to me. So that information got to me. And then not shortly after, I think it was in February or March of this year, the handbook was amended or added to, and the section individuals whose sex is not clear at birth came in that revision.
Did that sort of match the content of its leadership address? Okay.
It did. And it was never confirmed to me that it was a direct link.
Right.
But by all indications, there is that strong link. I'm not the first person to write to the church about intersex topics. I was actually connected with someone who did a few years ago, but that's kind of the timeline there. And what came out of it was the section in the handbook, which we can dive into, or I have since reached out to the church about the handbook section as well.
So what are sort of the bullet points of what the church is now saying we can definitely link to that section. Now that the handbook is public, we can now link to that section for individuals who want to say it themselves. What are the bullet points that stand out to you that maybe you're expressing some concerns about to the church?
Yeah, specifically, I wrote about its language, the way that intersex people are described, and then also the direction that's given to church members. It starts off by saying, in extremely rare circumstances, a baby is born with genitals that are not clearly male or female. Right off the top, if a bishop is reading that, he says, in extremely rare circumstances, he can say, oh, well, I'm probably not anyone in my congregation.
How many redheads are in your stake, Bishop?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And there's so much that goes into being intersex besides our genitals. That, we are so much more than that. And so that's kind of they give a little bit of background. They talk about how parents may have to make a decision to determine a child's sex. And it talks about special compassion and wisdom, for youth and adults who are born with sexual ambiguity. And then it also talks about like specific questions about membership, priesthood, temple ordinances should go to the first presidency. So I did write to Dial and HO because I said, you're a lawyer, you know the power of words. Like, right. I'm a community member here ready to partner with you. Let's make this a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more accurate. And then I did write to Quentin L. Cook about what does that special compassion and wisdom actually look like? How can we do this for the intersex community? So those are the bullet points, and that was kind of a bit of my response to it.
Okay. So, you said that you're obviously not the only person that has addressed concerns about intersex individuals to the church. Is there like a community of intersex individuals with backgrounds in the church that sort of stay connected to discuss these issues and support each other?
No, not within the church. I only know one other intersex person who is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Our community, I didn't find the intersex community until I was about 27. The way it's kind of started was like an email group online, and it's progressed, and it's now an organization called Interconnect, or an organization called Interconnect does serve the intersex community, but it's not uncommon for people to have a hard time finding other intersex people, or feeling like available and like they've got the bandwidth to connect, or to be vulnerable or share their story. So yeah, not a lot of intersex people within the church that I know of.
So I really appreciate you being so vocal and really being an advocate for who you are and so many others, not only in the church but in society in general. I don't think there is a huge understanding of what it means to be intersex or what intersex individuals face. And so people like you who are doing this work of like educating people, I know that has to weigh on you and can be tiring at times. And for me, as someone who wants to be an ally to the intersex community, I appreciate the work that you're doing to educate me and educate everyone that's watching this program. I'm really excited to have this conversation available to the Affirmation community so that we can all better understand and how to be better allies. Because if we're going to use the term or the acronym LGBTQIA, we need to make sure that we have an understanding on how to support all the individuals represented by those letters. So I really appreciate what you're doing. Can you share with us a bit more? I know that you're doing a lot about in this space to be an advocate for the intersex community.
Yeah. So a lot of like where I started is really with the church. That's kind of was my first avenue there. Growing up, I did have to advocate for myself in the medical community or medical setting. It wasn't uncommon for me to have to tell a general, practice doctor or nurse practitioner, like tell them what androgen insensitivity is. So for my whole life, I've been kind of, explaining it and telling people. I'm pretty vocal online. My social media is something that I drive a lot of my intersex thoughts and content through, or resharing content there. I'm also a volunteer and engagement coordinator at Interconnect. So that's the online support group. We just had a hangout last night. So people from across the United States and really the world are part of that group. And then where I'm going with my career and what I want to do is there's that need for understanding of the intersex community. There definitely needs to be a lot more research, but there also needs to be resources. There's a handful of organizations in the United States that serve, but there's a lot of underlying issues for access to care, adequate health care, like we've talked about law and policy, just general visibility and education. So my plan is to study public health. There's a wonderful program at Boston University to study community assessment, program design, implementation, and evaluation. So getting those tools in my tool belt to really go after it and help the intersex community and affect change there.
That's fantastic. I definitely wish you all the best in that journey. And just having known you, exchanging emails, and in this conversation, I feel like you are going to do great things regardless, just because of your passion and the vulnerability that you have to talk about your story and to advocate for everyone in similar situations. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
What can we, as Affirmation is is a community of current and former Latter-day Saints who are part of the LGBTQIA community. What can we do as that community and in society broader to support intersex individuals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is educating yourself. This is a great opportunity for that. And if you're watching, thank you. If you're still watching, awesome. Educating yourself should lead to informed decisions, and it should inform the way that you talk to people. So much of what the intersex community needs is visibility and education. We need people to know that we're here, that we're valid, that our bodies should not be altered, or there's nothing wrong with us. Our bodies are beautiful, and that's the way that they should be seen. And so I think a lot of it is people listening and educating themselves, but then going and having those proactive conversations. If you're watching this, tell someone about it. Talk about it over dinner with your family. When I released my first video, a lot of my friends and close friends, or people I went to college with, said this spurred conversation, and it should. A lot of what intersex people are is different. It can shift our perspectives of how we see the world, male, female, and now intersex. And so I'd say just have those proactive conversations with people. Let it inform your decisions, how you speak, and the way that you, I guess when I say like how you speak, be aware of like any microaggressions that you've got, saying, hey guys, or gendering things male and female is not always accurate. It's not uncommon now for jokes to be made about our bodies. If you say small dick energy, a lot of people know what that means, or big dick energy, people know what that means. Well, micro penises, some intersex people have micro penises, and that's an aggression towards the community. And so, just an awareness that our bodies are different, and that's okay. Radical inclusion for genetic variation is a great place to start, and understanding those types of concepts. You can also support intersex organizations like Interconnect that I mentioned, as well as Interact, which is more of a, they're focused on law and policy and activism. And then Intersex Justice Project, which is a grassroots BIPOC-led organization. So donating to those organizations, to be quite honest, is a great way to support us.
And we will include links to all of those organizations along with this interview. So thank you for sharing those. Tomorrow, October 26th, is Intersex Awareness Day. So can you talk to us, A, just kind of about the day in general, and then B, we know that you are part of a special event tomorrow evening. So if you can tell us a bit about that event, which we will also link to in this interview, that would be great.
Yeah, perfect. Tomorrow's Intersex Awareness Day, and it's actually the first Intersex Awareness Day that I'm out as intersex. So really awesome, pretty special for me. And really what it means is that we're spreading that awareness. A lot of intersex people are doing actions through this weekend and tomorrow. In New York, today, there's some action about a bill in New York City to spread awareness to families and medical people, you know. So a lot of us are getting involved and just raising our voices today and tomorrow. And what Intersex Awareness Day started as was exactly that. It was an action at a hospital. There's a pediatric conference back east. I believe it was in New York. But it was the first time that, you know, there was that public action, and that was on October 26th. So we recognize that day as a community, and it is now international as Intersex Awareness Day. So just spreading that education and awareness, because clearly the community definitely needs it.
Absolutely. And then your event tomorrow evening.
Yeah. Bradley Talbot of Color the Campus and I are going live tomorrow to discuss intersex and queer topics and talk about all things visibility. We're also going to be answering some questions that people have got. Bradley's awesome. We've had a relationship online a little bit, and he runs Color the Campus, which is a social media account that supports queer students at BYU schools. So they're the ones that have organized those Rainbow Days at BYU schools.
Yeah, and we have definitely made sure to express our love and support for those that participate in the Rainbow Days and Color the Campus. And this sounds like a great opportunity for people to connect there and connect with you and ask some additional questions. Maybe between this event and tomorrow's event, maybe they'll have some questions on their mind they might want to reach out to you at that event for. And we will share that link along with this interview as well. But we're coming up to sort of the end of our time here, Courtney. Is there anything that we have missed that you want to share with the community before we close out the program?
I would just say that I have immense intersex pride. It's something that I have hid for so long in my life, and it should be celebrated. You know, a lot of the work that I do has been self-affirming. It has been like, oh, wow, this is who I am. But really, the intersex community deserves that love and that joy and that pride in who they are. And allies are so, so important. So we appreciate any amplification of our voices, of our stories, and having those conversations over dinner that just, you know, broaden our perspectives of the world and include us.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for being here this evening and sharing your story and for your advocacy. For everyone that joined us this evening for this program, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, this will be available going forward on the Affirmation website so that the next time someone searches intersex at affirmation.org, this interview will come up, and hopefully more content and more education in the future so that we can better understand and support our intersex siblings. So thank you again, Courtney, so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.